The sweeper, you've heard a lot about it, but what the heck is it? Let's dig in. The main thing to understand is that you could categorize pretty much any slider in baseball that breaks about 13 inches or more horizontally above 80 miles per hour as a sweeper. But the reason it has become so popular in baseball today is that teams are realizing there are particular grips used that are very conducive to maintaining this amount of sweep at higher velocities. See, the sweeper adds vertical movement and horizontal movement in ball flight, during ball flight. And this is due in part to how the seams of a baseball interact with the air around the ball as it is moving towards the plate. On average, last year, sweepers added about 5 inches of vertical movement and about 3 inches of horizontal movement on its way to the plate. Some, like Driveline Baseball's Chris Langan, who's a fantastic guy, one of my favorite follows on Twitter, really smart baseball mind, would call this free movement. What does free movement mean? Free movement is the idea that you're adding that movement as the ball is flying rather than having to create that shape and that spin at release. You don't have to over-supinate at release, which is the hand motion primarily associated with spin on curveballs and sliders, whereas pronation, the opposite of supination, is the hand motion primarily that has to do with fade on changeups, turning over changeups, so to speak. So without having to do that at the cost of more supination, which generally means the velocity is lower the more you supinate, you're able to create a greater shape above a higher threshold of velocity. And I won't get into too much detail here, but that free movement is more generally associated with sliders and side spin as opposed to curveballs and topspin. And this is the reason why you don't see a lot of curveballs in the 83 to 85 mile per hour window with 13 inches of downward break, whereas the population now of these sliders that are 83 to 85 with 13 inches of horizontal break is far greater. Teams are realizing the trend and jumping onto the bandwagon to create these pitch shapes. So to quickly recap, the sweeper adds movement in flight on its way towards the plate, due in part to how the seams of the baseball interact with the air around it as it's traveling towards home. And this allows the pitcher to throw the pitch harder. It allows them to create a ton of movement at a high velocity, and they do not have to supinate it as much. It does not come at the cost of more supination. I mentioned earlier that there's a particular grip teams are using to create this movement at such a high velocity, and it is the two-seam slider grip. And it is exactly what the Yankees did between 2021 and 2022 with Holmes to turn his slider into one of the best in baseball and turn him into one of the best relievers in baseball. After acquiring Holmes in 2021 from the Pirates, it seems like Holmes was throwing a pretty classic slider grip right on the inside of the horseshoe of the ball, creating a little bit of a bullet, but really not resulting in too much movement. Fast forward to 2022, and the pitch has gained about 8 inches of horizontal movement, and he's lost only about 2 to 3 miles per hour of velocity. And Holmes' slider is now devastating, inducing nearly double the amount of swing and miss compared to 2021. Now, I don't think it's as simple as going out, grabbing a two-seam slider grip, ripping it, and coming up with one of the best sliders in baseball. There are obviously a lot of layers to it, from thumb placement to proper cueing of the athlete and a variety of other things, endless list. But one thing I will leave you with, one nugget that I found really interesting, was in conversation with a major league pitcher. His organization acquired him in the offseason, and heading into this year, they wanted to give him a sweeper. So they gave him the classic two-seam slider grip. He went out, threw it, and could not create the shape that they wanted. He wasn't able to get it to sweep as much at that high velocity threshold. And he told me that his coach told him to throw it like a curveball and let the seams do the work. And from there, he was able to actually create the sweeper shape. I found that a really interesting cue, because my interpretation of what the coach is saying there is that you do not have to create that movement. You do not have to supinate a ton at release. You can let the seams of the ball interact with the air around it and create an amazing pitch. And that's a really good distillation in my mind of something really complex to a very digestible level for the athlete to actually implement. And now this pitcher sweeper is fantastic. And for Holmes, well, he's one of the best relievers in baseball now. I love the slider, and I don't think he's losing the Yankees closer job anytime soon.